So we'll do very quick introductions and just make a note of the time. So with us, we have Melanie Lane, who is the CEO of Shell Recharge Solutions. Shell's work on electric vehicle charging across Europe. Benoît Lemegnon is CEO of Verkor, who is a new battery manufacturer based in France. And Tom Vernon, CEO of Statera here in the UK. So if I can, I'm going to ask each of you to say a little bit about what it is that you do and what your companies do. Melanie, I'll start with you first at Shell Recharge Solutions. We have something in common that we both used to work in Shell Aviation many years ago. And what we heard earlier from Sky Energy is roughly something that was like a 5,000 or 10,000x scaling required. For all of you, that's easy, right? You only have to grow 10 times or 20 times, something along that line. So are you going to do that in the next 2 or 3 years?
Oh my goodness, that's a big question. So what is the question, what we do or whether
How about we say what you do and how quickly do you think you're going to scale that business?
Okay, so in terms of what we do, so we are a company that Shell acquired a few years ago. It was a kind of a scale-up organization. We provide 360 solutions, so hardware, software, services. We put that into consumers, businesses, charging network operators, and we do it on the go, destination, basically you name it. We provide those kind of services. Now, to your point around how quickly we're going to scale, that for me is the big thing. And it's one of the things, just listening to the panel before, for me, scale is everything. So how fast can you scale? So we've got lots of innovative organizations, some of which I describe them as being built on sellotape and cardboard. So great innovation, but in order to kind of scale to the level that we need, that's a bigger challenge. So how fast? As fast as possible, but a lot of challenges there, which is kind of what I'm working on.
Great. Well, Benoît, so I joined Macquarie just about 5 years ago. And at the time, Europe was roughly 2-3% of new car sales were electric. We're now 20-25%. So, you've got a mandate by 2030 that every car has a plug, new car sold in Europe, I should say. We hear a lot about the IRA and the US taking the lead on a lot of this. Maybe a challenge to that is even with the IRA, Bloomberg's numbers were 40-50% penetration by 2030. You're looking at 100. How quickly are you going to scale batteries? And tell us a little bit about Verkor and what it is that you do, but how do you think that scale is going to happen?
I think it will require a lot of dedication, engagement, and talents, and of course some support from all the ecosystem. I think what we do is to try to fill the gaps that were identified earlier in the presentation of BNEF, for example, and the big green bar that you all seen on the electrification of transport, which is the easiest way to remove emissions in one of the most difficult sectors to tackle, which is transport. And the beauty is, and we were discussing that together, is that the solution is existing today. It's not requiring any type of innovation. It's just about scaling up. And this is exactly the point. How to build enough batteries to serve the needs of those markets. And this is the challenge in which we have been launching Verkor now 2.5 years ago with the intention to accelerate, scale up that manufacturing, which means building new factories, gigafactories, in Europe, why not elsewhere afterwards. And for that, we begin by designing a product, designing a process, implementing those factories, finding customers, big customers. We have a very big offtake agreement with a top European OEM, and we are accelerating on that. The challenge as of today for me is that we need to switch. It was said earlier today. We need to switch from an existing industrial ecosystem to another one. This is what we are going to do. It's not about only transition in use cases. It's a transition in the industry. And this is not easy because it's also a change in mindsets, in competencies. We don't have battery engineers in Europe today. We need to grow those battery engineers. And then we need to train them and have those factories ready. So this is what we do and where we are.
Great. And Tom, so we had a 100x growth or thereabouts that we need. We have a 5x growth. In the UK power sector, we've essentially decarbonized almost half of our power generation now. So only a 2x growth, no problem, right? And as many of us have heard every time we meet sort of cranky old uncles, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't blow. So can you tell us a bit about Statera and what you're doing in terms of making the UK grid resilient for all of those times where renewables aren't necessarily on at the moment?
Sure, yes. So we're a developer, a growth IPP, specializing in developing the assets to balance a high renewables power system, providing flexibility to the grid. Majority owned by InfraRed Capital Partners, managed funds, and have delivered 1.1 gigawatts of projects in the UK to date. 80% of those are batteries. I'd say we're up there as a market leader in battery storage in the UK. It's around £500 million worth of investment. But that's where we are today. And going forward, as you say, there's just this huge transformational shift, I would say, in terms of how the power system is going to operate over the next decade or so through to 2030. If the UK gets anywhere close to meeting its renewable targets on wind deployment in particular, we're going to have this major change in terms of the excess and shortfall of renewable power on the grid. Right now, there are very few hours of the year where we have an excess in renewable supply. By 2030, there's a range of predictions of 30 to 40% of the time. And in our view, the way we solve for that, providing resilience and decarbonisation, is for a range of energy storage solutions, really. So we have 2 gigawatts of batteries going through planning at the moment, and they're anything up to 1 to 10 hours in duration. We've got 1.5 gigawatts of pumped storage that we think provides sort of mid-duration response, up to around 20 hours in duration, going through front-end engineering and design and planning in Scotland at the moment. And then for the really long sort of multi-week, monthly balancing that is required in particular in a wind-led system, we think hydrogen is going to have a very significant role to play in balancing the power systems. It's the production component, green hydrogen I'm referring to, but also storage, networks and storage, and decarbonisation of thermal generation for those, as you say, those 2 to 3 weeks of low renewable output in the winter. Yeah.
Actually, maybe on that, you mentioned pumped hydro storage, which is really interesting. It's not something that normally gets talked about in the UK. We hear about it all the time in Scandinavia or elsewhere and trying to build connectors. What are your thoughts on the available market in the UK?
Well, no, I think that the opportunity is really very significant. The challenge with pumped hydro is availability of sites. So there's a renaissance happening in the UK. Statera is one of a number of the large incumbents. SSE, Drax are also have gone public on projects they are developing. Really interesting if you've got the site. And it's very, very site-led. You've got the topography, so it's all about CapEx, get that CapEx cost down. What we've seen that's really quite interesting from a pump storage perspective is whereas in the 50s and 60s, the sites were at a circa 50-60% round-trip efficiency, we've now seen technology develop, so we're getting up towards 80% efficiency. So that's close to where batteries are, 85-88% with batteries. But that CapEx per kilowatt hour at the longer durations for the daily, weekly balancing is more competitive, we think, than where batteries are today and ultimately where they can get to as well. So really, it's very much about the site, but if you've got the good site, I think there's really quite an interesting opportunity there with pumped storage.
Great. Well, obviously, when we talk about flexibility and resilience in the power system, storage and dispatchable power is a big part of that. Maybe on your side, in terms of resilience, one of the questions we get constantly, and I'm sure you have, and I know you and I have spoken about it, is the security of supply of your value chain. We don't have many lithium mines in Europe. We don't have many nickel, manganese, nor cobalt mines in Europe. What is your approach in securing mineral resources, and what are your thoughts of available reserves and the challenges that those minerals represent?
That's an important question. The other one is always, what about recycling? So I try to give you some elements of the two of them. I think one important element that we have to understand and realize together is that manufacturing batteries, using them for 15, 20 years and probably on a second life, doesn't mean that we are going to consume those materials. So it's a unique opportunity also to build a closed-loop value chain that will last for the next decades or so, because the lithium, the cobalt, the manganese that you'll have in your electric vehicle, and by the way, I'll be happy to see whom from the audience is already driving an EV, but will be there after you, and after you have been using it in your car. So we need to build a stockpile to start with, a stockpile of those energy transition metals that are globally abundant. We don't anticipate a lack of those metals. What we need is to have enough capacity to extract them, refine them, transfer them, to put them into battery-grade metals that we can use. And there are some challenges. We are in Europe now exploring some mines. There are mines in the Nordics. There are mines also that will be open in Iberia Peninsula, in France, in eastern countries also. But that probably will not fulfill 100% of our needs. So that's why we need also that geopolitics of metals, because there are resources, abundant resources everywhere in the world. What is more difficult is to have sustainable, let's call it like that, sustainable mining and sustainable resources to cope with all the ESG topics that you know very well, and in which we are engaged because our customer and the customer of our customer is engaged. As a car buyer, you want to know how this has been built and how respectful the value chain has been toward those initial resources. So this is progressing very well. Transparency is also now being brought by the players, and this is why we want to localize in Europe this value chain, and later maybe in the US, to also give some warranties on the way this is manufactured. And last, we will close the loop. That means that those materials, those metals will be used more and more. So for the next 15, 20 years, we have to build this stockpile, and then we will live on it by recycling the batteries and using them for a second, a third, a fourth life.
Can you say a little bit about the current state of play in battery recycling technology today? I'm not too worried that how many battery recycling plants do we have, because all of the EV batteries are still in EVs. But in terms of ability to extract and get those metals back out again, what are you seeing as state of technology today, and where do you think that goes in the future?
The state of technology today is where we need it to be able to recycle a battery. Yeah. The thing is, we don't do it because we don't have the flows. But the investments are coming up, and we are going to localize our first gigafactory in Dunkerque, north of France, and very close by we'll have a recycling facility. Now, the difficult question for investors in this recycling unit is whether they should do it now, in 5 years, in 10 years, because if the factory is standing still for 5 years or 10 years, then we don't have a business plan. So this is really the question, is when to start, when to trigger the investment for this capacity. But technology is already there. It's just hydrometallurgy, which is what we do in other metallurgical industries.
Great, thanks. And I know a question you had, and maybe we have a bit of audience participation. Can everyone who owns a vehicle of any kind put your hand up? All right, so you see the room. If you own an electric vehicle, can you keep your hand up? All right, there's a lot of wealthy people in this room. Buy more EVs, I think, is the answer there. So on to electric vehicles. We often hear the need for high power and ever higher power charging. As an avid EV driver myself, I understand the need for that, and we have lots of investments in that space as well. But one of the things where I use your services much more often is actually via Ubitricity, so lamppost charging. I generally charge my EV in London from a lamppost. Can you talk a little bit about that suite of solutions you're looking at, and with all the driver surveys and things that you do with Shell, a bit more about that mosaic of solutions that we need in terms of charging?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot in there. So the driver survey that you just referred to, so we do a really large survey every year, about 15,000 respondents across Europe, and over the last few years, you've really seen that tipping point. So more than 70% of respondents say, yeah, like electrification is the way to go, and we believe in electrification. Of those, however, about 55% say they're super nervous about the infrastructure and the ability of the infrastructure to keep up with the kind of the electrification trend. It's a side story, but I have a personal story on that. My dad is a bit of a hippie. He bought his EV. He's not rich. He didn't buy a Tesla with 350-kilometer range. He kind of bought a much smaller car, much smaller range. And it took him about 9 months before he had to give it back and change it for a hybrid, because trying to, live his life, like go to the Lake District or Cornwall or London, even from the Cotswolds, couldn't do it. So it's a really real issue. So what does it take? You just said it. It's a mosaic of solutions. So on-street parking and on-street charging is super important. So at the early stages, driveway charging was a lot of your early adopters. They've got their own homes. They've got their own kind of off-street parking. It's fine. So it was a really big home market. Now what you're looking at is you're needing kind of a suite of kind of on-street through Ubi, the home, but also fast charging networks. Now with fast charging networks, even that is a mix, because the time taken, the lead times to get that infrastructure in the ground up and running, it can be like 9 months, right, before you've actually got a site that's working and operational. So even there, we're looking at a mix of solutions. So where you're directly connected to the grid, but maybe where you're using battery storage technology to get those sites up and running as quickly as possible. So by 2030, we've said we want 90% of drivers to be 10 minutes away from a charger. That is a big challenge. And you know, you said it's kind of, you know, we know how to do this. This is kind of, it doesn't need a lot of innovation, but it needs innovation in the way that we work together. We are trying to do in basically 10 years in a new system what it took us about 100 years to do in hydrocarbons, and that's a massive challenge. So it's a mosaic. It's not just a mosaic of kind of geography, it's also a mosaic of technology solutions. And it requires a lot of different partners to come together to do that at speed and at scale.
Yeah. What do you see as some of those barriers? So you mentioned the 9-month lead time, especially for high power charging. What are the key barriers that you see to that?
So there's a number. So you've got supply chain. So you've got kind of OEM and hardware supply chains. That has been a bottleneck over the last couple of years. It's easing up, but if you look at the projected demand, we're not there yet. We don't have security of supply. You've then got the connectivity to the grid and the number of kind of like permits and number of different parties that need to come together in order to make that happen. I'll give you an example. In the UK, we have, we're rolling out a fast charging network, and it has become so complicated that the local businesses in the UK and Germany and the Netherlands, they've put together cross-functional teams in what they call revolution rooms, rev rooms, to crack the multitude of problems that you need to solve just to get a few sites up and running. In those rooms, you have probably 30 experts from different spaces. So not just Shell, I'm talking about, you know, you're bringing in the legal teams, you're bringing like landlords, like grid experts, kind of infrastructure, installers, electricians, because the number of barriers that you need to overcome are so, that there's so many of them. So you've got the timing and the complexity of that ecosystem. You've then got things like capabilities. You talked about this. We don't have enough electricians to meet the need and the capacity requirements over the next few years. We just don't have them. So then you've got that. You've then got, even when you talk about the electricians that you need, you've then got the whole lens of quality. So great that, you know, yes, there are lots of people moving into this space, but you need quality. This is a high risk space. And so you need kind of quality and assurance. And then you need the right regulatory frameworks. Again, like a really small example, hardware. There are different hardware regulations in every market in Europe. Now, we kind of go, okay, well, you know, France does it this way, Germany does it this way, UK does it this way, fine. But what that means for a tech company like us, we have to design and build and scale multiple different versions of hardware for different use cases for different markets. Again, you could say, all right, fine. But we're not at scale yet. And so all the time, our devs are working on those different use cases, different markets, different solutions. They're not doing a bunch of other things. And actually, we need all of these different pieces to be worked on. So maybe that sounds overwhelming, but there are multiple kind of different bottlenecks as you go through the system.
Yeah, so you've both mentioned skills. I mean, one of the challenges that people raise a lot is that, you know, we hear we need STEM education, but I think really one of the challenges is we need technicians, we need electricians, we need plumbers, we need heating engineers. I mean, on your side as well, doing a lot of distributed generation and distributed storage, is skills something that you're running into as a challenge?
Well, we've chosen to internalize that quite a lot, actually. Yeah, so vertically integrate and deliver our projects in-house as the main contractor. And yeah, no, finding good people is a big challenge, has been in this environment over the last few years. Absolutely, I'd say that is one of the challenges, yeah, getting the people in place. We're really focused on our people at Statera, with the skills to manage the risk and manage the execution risk that we have within the business. So yeah, I would agree with you, it's a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. And for both of you, I mean, I know you've got the Verkor Innovation Center focusing on R&D and the technology development. Is that where you're doing people training as well?
Yes, and for that also, because we believe it's important, and you named it, to work as an ecosystem to help each other in this journey. It's not about being, you know, a solo player. So we've created what we call the battery school, École de la Batterie in French, just for that objective, from operators up to, you know, white collars, to be able to have people understanding what it's about, understanding what is at stake, what do we do things a certain way, because somehow batteries is a bit like cooking cookies, you know, it's really about mixing powders and then coating them and then having those batteries being assembled and then aged and formed, and each step requires specific skill sets that are existing in other industries. This is the beauty also of that battery industry is that we can pick those talents in other industries, train them, and get them ready to do the job, but also spill over, because we cannot be successful if we are alone. It's like the friends of Northvolt, of ACC. We try also to combine the talents and expertise so as to become really an ecosystem which will really benefit to the whole industry, and this is what we are doing in Grenoble indeed right now.
Okay. Maybe, Benoit, continuing with you. So you mentioned Northvolt and ACC. Not everybody will be familiar with them, and maybe the battery landscape. So can you say a little bit, I mean, going from essentially a startup, which is what you are, going into an industry where people are already at the gigascale, right? You're already competing with massive Korean, Japanese, Chinese, and a few, one American manufacturer in this space. How have you gone about approaching that? How have you gone from startup to securing long-term offtake agreements with a major auto OEM?
Well, first of all, even if everyone sees this market as already mature, it's not at all. I mean, we're going to scale up by probably a multiple of 10 or 15 in the next 8 years. So this is unique, and this is a huge demand. And the biggest players as of today, they're probably, let's say, five years ahead in terms of capacity scale up, but they are also scaling up very carefully. Because everyone knows that it's not because you claim you're going to do delivering 5, 10 factories in the next 5 years that you can do it. So you have to be focusing your effort and your capacities. So what we have chosen to do is to attract a bunch of talents that have been doing that in other companies, to leverage this and save this time of early learning, and to be able to develop the product in 18 months, and to develop the process, and then to expand to a third gigafactory. So why do we have an important OEM, Renault, as an investor and shareholder? It's exactly because they also want to have a vertically integrated positioning in this value chain. Some of the OEMs are also now moving into the charging sphere, and as you know, and even into energy production, because they understand that they have to play global with more a partnership relationship than what they used to have in terms of supplier and customer approach, which cannot allow a shared development and a shared improvement of the product. This is exactly why these alliances are being built, and you saw that with Northvolt and Volkswagen, and ACC with Stellantis. And this is the way the industry is organizing, with a sense of shortage in the battery business, which is now being seen by the players. I mean, you all know that the semiconductor crisis has led to a reduction in the car production, but the battery is the next frontier. And why don't we see EV trucks, for example, for now, is simply because there are not enough batteries to sell massively the trucks. So this is about bringing to the market the volumes.
And maybe on the technological innovation side, so we talked earlier about NMC, nickel, manganese, cobalt, lithium-ion batteries. What do you see in terms of battery technology? I had an old rule in my previous company, in my team, if they used the word breakthrough and battery in the same sentence, I kicked them out of my office. What are your thoughts on where battery technology goes from here?
I would say two things. First of all, the existing technologies, the one we are developing at Verkor, the performance of the battery is what the market needs in 25. We will be serving big volumes in 25 to address 90% of the needs. Okay, so this is the first important point. We don't need a breakthrough in the technology to be able to have the range that, sorry for your dad, but most of the people will be able to satisfy their needs. This is one, also because the network of charging options will improve. The second element is that and there were a recent paper that was published by a former BNF guy, James Fried, which is excellent in terms of framing that, not in terms of innovation, but TRL, technology readiness level. Because every other day you have hype on such, fancy solid state technology or red flow or whatever. And the journey is very long between the innovation at lab scale, which can be fantastic, and putting it in a car at large scale volume, which is a completely other story. And typically can take 5, 10, 15 years. So our positioning is to say, let's build the ecosystem for the top technology of today, and let's attract innovations in the anode, in the cathode, maybe later for semi-solid or whatever. But for us, it's more like a 5, 10 years journey to be able to scale that up. So we are in this position of being connected to the ecosystem, but also willing to accelerate with the best available technology as of today.
And then maybe on the charging side then as well, we heard earlier from, I think it was Catherine who said about reuse of existing infrastructure. You mentioned that we spent 100 years building hydrocarbon infrastructure. Shell and others, including portfolio companies of ours, are looking quite a bit at how do we repurpose existing oil and gas infrastructure for clean molecules. I guess one of the questions would be forecourts and petrol stations across Europe. What is the role for the petrol station in the future of all electric transport? Appreciating that a lot of them are under franchise licenses and that sort of thing, but yeah.
So go back to your Mosaic piece. The existing infrastructure that we have today is obviously a big asset. So we've got 45,000 service stations all around the world. That's just a big amount of real estate. And being able to repurpose that in a way that meets the needs of customers in the future. So the needs will be slightly different. I mean, you drive an EV, you don't go to a service station in the same way that you did, right? But you do need urban hubs, right? You do need locations where you do have heavy use vehicles, not heavy goods, but heavy use, and you need to provide the right kind of charging facilities. So that infrastructure, I think, can be repurposed, and that's certainly part of what we're doing at the moment. But it will also need to be supplemented. So the network of what a consumer believes is convenient is also going to need to include supermarkets and cinemas and car parks and multiple other places. So I think the landscape of refueling is going to look quite different over the next decade, for sure.
Yeah. And from your perspective, how far into that customer relationship do you want to go as Shell? Meaning, do you imagine getting into energy services behind the meter at homes? Do you see EVs themselves as charging assets that you would want to someday be involved in vehicle to grid or other smart charging type dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, we're already working in that space. So smart charging, yes. Even bi-directional charging, yes. We've done kind of proof of concepts. Within the portfolio, we've got solar as well. So a company with a whole solar solution. So looking at energy management systems is really important. So all of our fleet customers, our business customers, depot customers, they need those integrated solutions. Just having kind of an infrastructure on the go isn't enough. They need the whole kind of package. So that's very much something that we're working on and looking at, yeah.
Thanks. And Tom, so thinking about the impact that EVs have on grids, and both positive and negative, or opportunities and challenges, or however we want to frame that. What are your thoughts on what EVs will do to and for the UK grid, and how does that affect your business?
There's a couple of effects, isn't there? So obviously increased demand substantially. If you're into energy generation, that is a positive thing. And I think they're going to have a critical role to play on the margins. So EVs, it's demand side response, essentially flattening the demand curve over a day or so. But I don't think they really or cannibalize the utility scale storage that's required to shift large volumes of renewable power. So I think EVs on the margin for short duration batteries, flattening the daily curve is really powerful. But for arbitraging those really large volumes of renewable power across days and weeks, excess wind in Scotland, we need utility scale storage. Large batteries, pump storage, and hydrogen. And to your point, actually, just on the repurposing side of things, I think another area in electrification that's interesting for repurposing is hydrogen in balancing the power system. We're currently working with National Gas, I think it's now owned by Macquarie, to look at the Project Union. There's an opportunity to repurpose the NTS for the transmission of hydrogen, particularly down from Scotland down to the carbon clusters. I think it's really important from an electrification perspective because it provides resilience. We've got grid constraints with all the renewable power in Scotland coming down to the rest of the UK. If we can repurpose the gas network to move energy down, electrolysis into the gas network to thermal generating units in England, there's a really important role in terms of providing resilience and decarbonisation through hydrogen. And then the other point around repurposing is I think a significant opportunity in repurposing existing unabated gas generation to hydrogen. Something we're very focused on is we've got a site, a 100 megawatt project at Teesside, fortuitously right next door to two blue hydrogen projects that are coming through the carbon cluster sequencing program, and really excited about the opportunity to repurpose to hydrogen from from gas.
Could you say a bit more about that? So for, not everybody will be that familiar with what is the possibility to use hydrogen in an existing gas turbine or carbon-derived fuels into recip engines and that sort of thing that you would have in the portfolio?
In terms of the technological challenges we face, batteries, pump storage, and electrolyzers in particular, I would say repurposing thermal is one of the sort of lesser challenges. The OEMs have clear roadmaps now, whether it's a turbine or gas recips to repurposing to hydrogen. Some question marks on what the outturn efficiency will be, but really, I think there's clear roadmaps now with the OEMs. It's more, building the business case. We see, hydrogen is great as a decarbonisation vector, but it's much better when it's combined with storage. So arbitraging that low-value renewable power to times of when the power is needed most, when there is essentially less renewables on the system. So it's putting that whole case together, the production, the networks and storage, and then the thermal generation side. Putting that all together, we see as key and as the long-term opportunity in balancing the power system.
And I guess lastly sorry, do you want to come in?
Just reflecting on that, because it's important for us as a battery designer and manufacturer. It's important to have the capacity to understand the way you're going to use those batteries in the cars in 10 years for demand response, for example. Because the chemistry we choose, the battery we design, is impacted by these needs that will come on top of the traditional driving laws that will be used. And we lack visibility on that today. So it's difficult for us to integrate that in the battery because we simply don't know in 10 years, 20 years, in UK, in France, in Germany, in the US, is this going to be a daily use case? Is this going to be twice a day or 10 times a day? And this is very interesting here. We need to try to be forward-looking together because otherwise you will be a little bit disappointed by the product, or the driver will say, oh, no, I don't want to do V2G because I will not have the runs that I want to have. So, it's interesting.
Yeah, that's a really big point for us. When Certera was founded back in 2016, we did one of the, I think we're the first mover in batteries in the UK. It was Europe's largest battery. And the big focus, working with our investors at the time, was having optionality in the use case. So flexible degradation warranties are a really big point. And you need that optionality down the line to, there might be 2 or 3 cycles a day to capture wholesale market revenues, or be at 0.5 to 1 cycles a day doing frequency response. So unfortunately, there's no simple answer there for that one. I think we need to retain optionality because the markets evolve. Yeah.
Just conscious of time, and as we said, we are between everyone in this room and drinks. Instead of ending on, what do we need from a policy point of view, I'm sure we can all talk about that over a glass of wine. Maybe what excites you in the year ahead? So if you have to pick 1 or 2 things that you're excited about in the next 12 months, what would it be in your sector? Anyone can go first. But
I'll go.
Oh, please.
I'll go first. Cap and floor for pump storage in the UK.
Sorry, cap and floor?
Cap and floor, the government's commitment to bring forward support for pump storage in the UK. That's something we're really focused on. And then we've got some really ambitious targets in hydrogen in the UK, 10 gigawatts by 2030. Going through, there's funding rounds at the moment. So I think there's going to be a step change, projects getting funded, revenue support, grant funding. So excited about the policy and the opportunity that provides to developers.
Fantastic, thanks. And what?
I'm looking forward to let's put it like that, the European answer to the IRA. We know it's coming, we've been involved into that, and I think it's exciting because it also relates to what kind of common industrial vision do we share at European level, including the UK, which is something that probably for the last, let's say, 10 to 20 years, we've forgotten a little bit, and what happened last year and what happened in the US in the last few weeks and months is helping us to gain momentum on that. I think this is very very exciting to see, and we at Verkor level anticipate that this will give a strong push to the European initiatives in the sphere.
Great. And for you?
Yeah, I was struggling because there's so many things, right?
Okay, I thought you were being really pessimistic there for a second.
No,
Sorry,
no, actually I'm not at all. I mean, I think, earlier we were talking about like the 2 minutes to midnight and what happens in the 2 minutes to midnight, the innovation and the urgency. I feel like we've just come out of, we've come out of COVID, and the kind of the focus on green is still there. We're not coming out of, but the crisis is associated with Ukraine, and the focus is still there. And so you just feel like this momentum is moving. So all the challenges that we've just spoken about, it feels like there's energy and opportunity in each of them. Like I don't have the answers, but that's I think that's really exciting. So it's hard to pick like one thing.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
A mosaic of solutions even, or
Well, there
of
you go.
opportunities. There we go.
Mosaic.
All right, well, I think we're all good on time. So thank you very much to the panelists. If everyone else could please join me, and thank you for making the time. And if you're sticking around, please grab everyone and ask questions after.